Hello, welcome to the Cloud Expo stage. And the topic of my talk is about cloud repatriation and when does it make sense for you. So a quick introduction. My name is Hubert Chan and I'm the Director of Cloud Data Innovation Platform with the Hudson Space Company. And throughout my life, I've been a consultant mostly for 20 years. And I've been working in the cloud for 8 years and also certified in 6 different cloud vendors. And for this talk, I actually take a devil's advocate lens to look at what does the reverse cloud journey look like. And a lot of the presentation focus on the observation that I see from some of my clients, some of the market, talking to industry colleagues, and some of my research. I would like to see if this talk actually resonates with you, and would love to hear your feedback. And if you disagree, I would also love to hear your perspective too. And feel free to ask questions at our Q&A. And also, I would actually encourage you to type in your questions in the chat box. So what is cloud repatriation? For the topic of this talk, cloud repatriation is the process of shifting public cloud workload back to an on-prem or hosted environment. And it can also be a private cloud environment as long as it's not a public cloud. And according to IDC, up to 50% of the organizations are actually considering some kind of cloud repatriation effort. Now, I'm not saying that they are all doing it, but there's some kind of project that is ongoing. So looking at some of the cloud trends throughout the last 5 to 10 years, why is many organizations moving to the cloud or to a totally cloud-first strategy? First is the time to market. So traditional procurement cycles are very slow, and both on the software and hardware side, it can take weeks to months to procure, and an incorrect decision can be very expensive. So yeah, even in my consulting days, I did my own share of vendor selections for many clients, defining the requirements and trying to understand, trying to help them make the right decisions. And with this public cloud, this can be a bit less costly going in and doing a lot of trial and error. The other part I see a lot is actually that come with the reinvent of the new leadership. So a new CIO come in and or new VP comes in. They want their own bold moves and had to have something that call themselves. So a lot of them focus on digital transformation or cloud first transformation, where they will actually have the own growth area. The other part that is very popular amongst the public cloud vendors is the cost saving aspect. So there is certainly a marketing aspect to it, but there's also definitely like a lot of gain from moving that workload into a public cloud. And the last part is the value driven, and where a lot of the argument focus on the return on investment, total cost of ownership, moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. For those that's not familiar, CapEx stands for capital expenditure. So it's kind of like buying your house. And where OpEx is basically operational expenditure. So those are kind of like expenses, bills that you have to pay every month, or like if you use the house analogy, is basically renting your house or renting a hotel. The only difference in that analogy is that your capital expenditure is never going to appreciate. So yeah, your old server is not going to be selling more than your new servers. Okay, so in this talk, I'm gonna separate into 3 different sections. First, we investigate what are the factors that are driving organizations to take on the cloud repatriation path. Some of this can be very obvious, some of them can be intrinsic, and some of them can be more of an observation from both my work with various different organizations and clients. And then we look at some of the decision that organizations make. What are some of the evaluation criteria, questions, and tools to help you make that decision if you really have to move your workload back from the public cloud? Yeah. And lastly, we look at how do we implement it and what some of the paths that various organizations has taken with the cloud repatriation journeys, and look at some of the pros and cons, and also looking at some of the heavy players in this that are heavily advocating the cloud repatriation game. So motivations. So the first one I've seen is actually the cost side. So CapEx versus OpEx discussion is buying a house. It's renting a house, the operation expenditure, paying the bill every month better than buying a house. In 2020, the COVID situation actually brings a different light to this to me. So being in retail, immediately we were extremely hard hit, and that get me thinking. In a traditional, many of the traditional retailer, we actually owns our real estate, and during economic downturns, that actually provides a buffer for us because we don't have to pay hefty amount of sum to continue to rent real estate. Whereas whereas in this capex opex model, the bill still have to come in, so it actually might not be as attractive in such economic downturn, right? Because in the own model, we basically own it, and then we can actually trim whatever expenses that's not needed. However, in the more OPEX model, the expenses still have to come in. We might be able to lower the consumption volume, but in this working from home day and age, we might actually increase our consumption. So not only that the bills continue to come in every month, but they're actually getting bigger, and we cannot easily trim it. So that brings me a different light to this whole capex turning into OPEX advantage. It might not be an advantage. The other part is on the vendor lock-in. A lot of the cloud vendors are very eager to give people credits and to get you onto the cloud and have you build and migrate the whole infrastructure to it. And in the system integrator landscape as consultants, we also seen one of the jokes, like at 100K spending, a lot of the vendors are very willing to help you on whatever you need, right? You call them at 9 or 10 in the evening, they pick up and get it done the next day. But the same might not apply when you're spending $1 million, because they know that you have it hooked. And this is true for public cloud vendors, same as a lot of the traditional software vendor, that where like signing 5-year contract will give you 30 to 40% discounts. Yeah, so this is no different on the vendor lock-in aspect. Another thing is the unpredictable nature of the cloud and its costs. A lot of people are rushing into the cloud, delivering innovations and product. However, they are leaving a lot of governance behind, and skills are often limited in organization. So some of those VMs just get pop up, and they are not necessarily tracking it, because in the traditional world, you don't have to shut down your machine every night. However, in the cloud world, is it the same? That's questionable. And the next thing is on the unsuitable workload. The public cloud is excellent for cloud native architecture and also innovative technologies such as microservices, on-demand data lake, AI services, and all that, right? Because it allows workload to have it actually address the dynamic nature type of workload very well, especially on the horizontal scaling, basically adding more machine horizontally versus. And also, it allows some type of vertical scaling, basically increasing the machine size. Yeah. However, a lot of the enterprise applications, unlike many web-born companies, they are full of legacy applications. And due to the limitation in the past, they are not actually designed for a dynamic workload, right? So they are designed for very stable workload. So they do not necessarily need the scaling that the cloud brings, but they're always operating at a certain level. The next part is on the cost optimization side. Public cloud offers a lot of automation features, especially in the DevOps world. So you can actually easily provide like a Terraform or CloudFormation script to actually create VMs as needed and turn on and turn off as needed. However, this is not always leveraged in an organization, so they might not necessarily getting that cost optimized the benefits. Lastly, what does the statistics tell us? According to one enterprise cloud survey is included in the reference section, only 2/3 of cloud adoptions are on budget or below budget. So how well are you controlling and monitoring your spending? so you don't become that 1/3 that actually go over budget or grossly over budget. Yeah. So the next factor that I see a lot is actually on the performance side. So performance in terms of network latency, availability, and application processing delay. Many organizations often underestimated the complex network redesign that's required to efficiently migrate and operate it in the public cloud. So network latency is a common theme for many of the migration, and remediation only occurs when the troubles start to head home. And this can be something like connecting from on-prem to public cloud, or between different regions, or between different customer in various type of clouds, whether it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service. And this is a story that hit hard. We had a client that actually like migrate the application into like US East 1. However, the home operations are actually all over the place. So they are not necessarily getting the speed that they currently have. Another interesting observation I've seen in the market is the availability aspect. Despite public cloud vendors claim that they will publish downtime on the availability dashboard, that's not always the case. And sometimes it is left to the IT staff to hurdle and around and find out what's the real issue. And unfortunately, a lot of the IT staff actually trust the marketing speak that cloud will never go down. So as a personal story for the last 6 months, I actually have seen 2 large public cloud vendors that had the region endpoints went down without informing the customer. And only after extensive escalation to the executive level that they admitted some responsibilities. So this is just 6 months alone, and it cost 2 to 4 hours of business disruption. The thankful thing is that we don't actually have mission critical applications that was affected. However, it can be very disastrous if we do. The other part is the application delay. So delays that might not necessarily be something that we think of in the beginning. For example, a lot of the public cloud vendors support standard VM configurations, and porting to the cloud only requires certain conversions. However, when we move to the cloud, there can also be a significant performance degradation that organizations have to temporarily or permanently move it back to on-prem or their own data center. And here's a story from one of the clients. During a recent Windows Server 2008 migration to Azure, it was chosen because Microsoft actually offered an additional 3 years support for an unsupported OS Windows 2008 server. However, once we moved the VM to the platform, due to the heavy integration nature, the servers are not necessarily performing the same as on-prem. So after technical decision, we actually have to move it back to on-prem for upgrade and investigation. The other part that is definitely in everybody's mind is the security and governance. So security in public cloud that get on the news is no news to any of us. Whether it is just an unsecure S3 bucket to incorrect role defined, this is always an issue. And working with some of the heavier regulated industry, for example, one of the large financial institute client actually took a 9-month engagement to vet out all the security and architecture aspect with the different stakeholders in the organization. And last I heard, they are not even totally convinced with about moving the data to the public cloud after that long journey. So it does not, public cloud adoption might not necessarily speed up your digital transformation if you are in one of those regulatory heavy and compliance heavy, risk heavy organizations. The other part is and with a lot of the cloud adoption, many organizations are not necessarily have the corporate policies defined or tweaked for a lot of the cloud forward organizations. Another part is the data residency. So where does your data physically reside? And regulations like GDPR, or for some of the healthcare clients, they actually do not want the data to leave the country. Also, some might not leave their own province or state. So this adds additional design costs to it. The last part is the shadow IT. Although it's not as prevalent as 5 years ago, but yeah, we still see like different departments, such as your marketing department hiring developers to get the marketing analysis done because working with IT was too slow. So this is not as common now that a lot of organizations are moving to the cloud. However, this can still cause some headaches and also a lot of sleepless nights when compliance securities are not compliant, and only when the organization failed a certain audit and that was found out. The last part is mostly an observations from my professional service days. Having good cloud talent is actually very hard, and amongst the other hot areas such as DevOps and also cloud security team. And also like the talent war is real, so attrition can also have an impact to our organization, especially on the cloud side. Cloud also calls for a very broad skill set. So in the past, as a data architect, I might need to know my data warehousing, my data engineering, data integration space. However, in the cloud world, you actually have to know your networking. You have to know your security. You have to know how to set up your identity and access management, role-based access, and even some of the newer tools like you have to understand Kubernetes and how do you actually design for high availability, disaster recovery, and all that shebang. So it actually requires more broader skills than a traditional role in the past. So what does the industry say? So here's what IDC say. IDC is looking at across all the different organizations, and they found out that around 50% have some kind of cloud repatriation effort on the way. And for the top repatriation driver, I think we have hit most of it, with security being the top and with an obvious reasons. And of course, in 2020, no study is complete without looking at some of the COVID-19 impact to the world. And according to IDC, it actually accelerated a lot of the cloud adoption into a private cloud as the highest public cloud, and only around 8% is increasing on the cloud repatriation, moving away back from the public cloud. So looking at decisions, how are organizations look at this cloud repatriation for them? So it really depends on if the decision is for a strategic level or is actually a tactical level. So tactical typically have larger business impact, come with a bigger value, and require more in-depth analysis. Where tactical is to address a certain issue, whether it's for a specific catch-up reason. So for example, in my earlier 2008 server migration, it is to enable another project so they can actually deploy the stuff into the server without having to do performance troubleshooting. And it also depends on where you are in your cloud journey. If you are just beginning on the cloud journey, you are more likely to take a more tactical aspect of repatriation versus when you are moving more towards like 50% to 80% of your workload is already in the cloud, or you're fully in the cloud, then or fully in the public cloud to move back. And for some of the tactical, for some of the more strategic decision, I would always recommend you to do a cost-benefit analysis. So looking at some of the drivers, what is it, whether it's an economy, to enable innovation, changing to a different business model, getting the company ready for M&A or for sale or optimization. And looking at some of the tipping points, what are some of the tipping points to decide whether you move a certain workload or certain program? So it might be for example, it might be something like a data residency issue for a large amount of data. So it might be you have to have your data lake reside in a non-public cloud environment. And also do a value analysis. Look at the return on investment, total cost of ownership, and see how much cost saving it is. And also don't forget to put in your project efforts, because those are part of the cost of moving off public cloud also. Lastly, these are some of the questions to consider. Like, are you wasting space on the public cloud? Are you having some compute that's always turned on but are not used? Do you have specific regulatory requirements or compliance, such as data residency, GDPR, or privacy concerns? Are you encountering any application or latency issues? And also, lastly, people often overlook, do you have enough IT capabilities? Do you have enough IT to do the maintenance, to do the support? So next, we will look at the implementation. What are some of the paths organizations take for the cloud repatriation? And also, what are some of the help that you can that are in place for you? So the obvious choice is actually to move to another data center, whether it's your original on-prem data center or a co-located data center. And usually, for a lot of the technical decisions that the organization is just starting the journey, this is where they would decide to move it back to on-prem, since they already spent the capital expenditure and have the hardware and networking is all set up that way. When they talk about co-located data center, one advantage of moving it to a co-located center is that many of these vendors also offer maintenance and support contracts. And service level agreements are much more flexible, and you can do a lot of more customized negotiation, where those cannot be easily negotiated with the big public cloud vendors, right? It's negotiating like with Google or AWS on specific terms is definitely a lot harder, if not impossible. The next few paths is actually to move to a non-public cloud environment. So whether it is to a private cloud or hybrid cloud or edge locations. So private cloud is defined as like a cloud-enabled infrastructure running in a private data center. It does offer some of the benefits of the cloud, like the software-defined networks, software-defined services and compute, with limited elasticity features that the cloud brings. And however, it will not have the latest innovation, latest AI services that are offered by public cloud. And it's always limited by the when was the latest hardware upgrade or latest software that was installed. For some organization that does not need the latest tech, but need tried and proven technology, that is actually a very good option. The other option that is also very, very popular is the hybrid cloud. Like, not many organizations will move all of the public cloud workload back to a private cloud or on-prem or on data center, right? Because you spend significant resources and money to move it in the first place. And public cloud does offer a lot of benefits with innovations and latest technology too, right? So hybrid cloud becomes a very natural option where you are doing a mixture of private cloud and public cloud. The other option is actually edge location. So edge computing is referring to moving compute and data closer to the consumer, whether it is end consumer or applications. So this has gained popularity with a lot of the IoT use cases, where a service call to a cloud gets a long turnaround results, right? Because you have to call the cloud, and then the cloud has to process that request and then send you back the result. Whereas moving that workload to the edge is actually a lot better. So this is actually very popular among a lot of IoT devices, some of the AI use cases where you can actually get inference inference result right on the edge without having to do that round trip to the cloud, to the public cloud and coming back. Lastly, for some of the organizations that actually plan ahead, some of the EC migration tools are also available. So such as like VMs, you can actually move a VM with minimal conversion from on-prem to the cloud, or from the cloud to the prem, or from different virtualization services, or Dockers and Kubernetes, or open source frame functions that will allow you to move some of the serverless functions from one cloud to another location. Lastly, we will look at some of the vendors that are actually very active in this space. So obviously the co-located data center. The hardware vendors are also very active in this space. However, unless you are building a whole new data center, you might not necessarily get a lot of attention from them, because hardware is actually a very margin-thin business, so volume counts for them. But some of the value-added hardware vendors, such as the big data storage arrays, are actually popular for like a data lake or log management and analysis type of operations. The last part that is interesting is the cloud orchestration layers. With many organizations starting to get into the multi-cloud environment, whether voluntary or involuntary, having that ring that rules it all is a must to an organization to give a holistic view to the whole infrastructure and software landscape. These vendors centralize in cloud orchestration and can use very similar software-defined tool to help you manage many different clouds. However, this also comes in all sorts of flavors and sizes, all the way from like the early days that OpenStack Pivotal Cloud Foundry that provides you that cloud-native management and orchestration layer, to VMware that actually allow you that seamless on-prem to cloud experience, or some of the more niche players such as Nutanix that focus on HCI on the cloud desktop, or OpenShift that only focus on Kubernetes and Dockers for some of the cloud-native applications. As I said earlier in this presentation, I jumped into this topic taking a more of a devil's advocate approach to cloud repatriation, trying to understand what, when, why, and how an organization would approach this topic. Cloud repatriation might not be an immediate topic in your organization or even in your enterprise cloud strategy, but I would recommend leaving a small chapter for it in your cloud strategy playbook. So you will work through some of the what if scenario or some of the why not scenario. Spending the time to do a proper cloud strategy and migration planning will save you a lot of headaches in the future, and you might not have to visit cloud repatriation. I hope this talk is interesting to you, and yeah, with some of the consulting in my blood, I would always advise you to consult with somebody that has been there, done it, and learn it from the costly mistakes, so you don't have to. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm open for questions.